kicked off this summer with Pivot's Phoenix 2.9. This was the nicest test bike in our fleet and a dedicated 29-inch platform. But what about something for all you rippers on a budget, or all you mixed wheel fanatics? Coming in a few $1,000s cheaper with multiple wheel configuration options, as well as geometry adjustment and a full aluminum frame, for this summer, our second downhill test bike is Trek's all-new Session. What's going on, everyone? I'm Jason Schroeder, and welcome back to Vital MTB's Summer of Downhill. As most people know, Trek Session has been one of the most dominant downhill bikes over the last decade. I could go into all the details of the Session lineup, but we already did that before. Roll it.
Trek has finally made their new high pivot Session downhill bike public. Trek is sure to make us remember their diesel downhill bike also had a high pivot, so they're not just jumping on a new bandwagon. The high pivot Session is alloy frame only, no carbon, comes in 3 different reach-based sizes, R1, 2, and 3, and respectively the reach measurements are 440, 465, and 495 millimeters. The chainstay length varies across the sizes while using the same rear end. Trek just tweaks the location of the bottom bracket on the front triangles to get 439, 445, and 452 millimeter chainstay lengths on the different sizes. Trek's Mino link is present for subtle geometry tweaks, like going from a 63 to a 63.6 degree head angle, but there's also a suspension progression Mino link, which provides either 20% or 25% progressivity, so you can have more pump or more plow on the Session. Cable routing is also up to the owner and can be internal or external. The new Session is built around and comes stock with dual 29-inch wheels, but can be run as a Mullet with 27.5-inch rear wheel, or it can go dual 27.5 while still using the 29-inch wheeled fork. There's just a tall lower headset cup that's used, so all of your Franken biking for the Vital MTB bike check section only requires the swap of a wheel or two. Frame-only options come with the special headset cup for a 27.5 front wheel. The complete bikes do not. It's clear Trek has sorted out the versatility of this new Session, and they go big on paper too, answering all the uber nerd questions about wheel path, pedal kickback, and more.
Of the 2 build options available from Trek, we tested the cheaper Session 8 2.9 GX build, which retails for $5,000 US. The new Session is visually more robust and industrial looking compared to its smooth carbon predecessor, and Trek states that the change in material was driven by the World Cup riders' feedback. This decision resulted in a nearly 4-pound weight difference between the previous Session 9.9, coming in at 33.6 pounds, and the 2021 Session 9 XO1 build, coming in at 37.6 pounds. My looking back and riding the Session during that era definitely was a very easy to get on and kind of go fast bike. There wasn't, nowadays a lot of bikes have insane adjustments with geometry and stuff, and they still had their Mino link flip chip, but I don't really remember messing with it much. It was very set it and leave it. It was an aluminum version at that time, but yeah, I remember it just being very easy to get on and feel comfortable and feel confident on. We definitely enjoy getting to ride a bike that came with some more base level suspension. Nowadays, we're definitely lucky enough to ride bikes that come with your upper echelon suspension options. And with a few less external adjustments, definitely didn't have the option to lean towards adjusting clickers to make up for our lack of riding ability.
Whose lack of riding ability?
So wheel size for me, I would go dual 29-inch wheels if I was gonna show up on a race weekend and try to be competitive. I think that for my height, I didn't have any issue with the rear wheel coming up and hitting me in the butt. Kind of the same experience on most 29-inch bikes I ride. The Mullet setup with a 27.5 in the rear, I definitely would ride if I was gonna go rip bike park laps with friends. It makes it mainly turning just way snappier. Your turning radius is so much quicker.
Wheel size for me, mixed wheel, 100% of the time I primarily race this bike. This wouldn't be my first pick for a bike park bike, but I would, race it in the mixed wheel format 100% of the time.
Yeah.
You got along with the Pivot and the Deuce Nueve. How about, why not this one as much?
Yeah, it was actually kind of frustrating to be gelling with 29-inch wheels on the Pivot and then struggling on dual 29 with the Session. And I don't know exactly the rhyme or reason, but the feedback I got, what I was struggling with in dual 29 format on the Trek was that I felt like I was on the bike Stack height was really critical. I had to dump the stack height to get the bike to lean the way I like and get that front tire to dig in a little bit. But I noticed that with the Dual 29, it made the rider posture more center rearward, kind of a little more old school, like I used to ride on the Intense M1 20 years ago. But just nowadays, I'm more center forward. And when we flipped the bike to the Mullet setup, mixed wheel setup, just felt like, ding, here we go. I'm in the bike. I dropped the stack height down to 10 millimeters, and then I actually ran my own personal bar and stem. So got rid of the 5 mil riser underneath the direct mount, ran a Slem Deity intake with a Race Point 25 mil rise bar, and the bike felt sweet at that setup for me personally.
Yeah, I think it's funny talking about the pivots like the first bike you rode, because fitment wise, you vibe much better with that than I did. And then I think it all goes to you ride definitely a bit more like neutral forward, and I ride kind of neutral back. And so for me on this bike, when I got on it and the bars were like immediately just more like in a higher, more comfortable position, I felt comfortable like first run on this, much more so than I did on the pivot, probably like 5 runs in.
Yeah.
And kind of your comment about the 27.5 in the rear, I noticed that when I did that, it just felt like I was a little bit more like sat into the bike. In rough, like real rocky stuff, I didn't notice any negatives from it. Like, I think this bike is so rearward moving in the suspension that no matter what size wheel you have on, it's gonna be getting out of the way of compressions and hits. Going to Cockpit setup, I did kind of the opposite of you. I put a spacer underneath the crown. Having a drop crown to begin with is super nice because you already have a lot more options to go higher. And then I lowered the stanchions in the crown, I think 8 millimeters. The bars are, I believe, 27.5 rise, which I usually run like 1.5 inch, 38 mil rise. So it's just under what I usually would run, and then kind of made up for that with the other spacers. The bar width is still 780, which I think part of this bike being a little bit higher and feeling like I had more room in the cockpit compared to the pivot, I didn't really have as many issues with like the bar width being a little under what I'd prefer.
I actually didn't mind the stock bar. It was a comfortable bend sweep, familiar. Yep. It was just kind of out of ease of setup that I ran my personal bar and stem on many test sessions. And some of your comments may have influenced that a little bit. But I really enjoyed I think this is a really well-spec'd bar. It's the right rise for this build. 780 is a fantastic width for me.
Yeah. Well, and like, I'd probably go 787, 790. I mean, it's small. Yeah. It's really like that little bit for me that when you're really hauling and things are getting like kind of dicey, that like added little bit of shoulder and kind of like arm stability I enjoy. But no, I totally agree. Like that bar, especially for being 35 bore and kind of like your sort of stock off the shelf components just in the Bontrager line, like it had decent compliance. I didn't notice it being too harsh or anything. I think probably my only real knock, again, is that the stock grips are just not really up to par. They're a little too thin for downhill riding. Like I think it's gonna start to beat up your hands after a few days of riding. So
yeah, agreed. Yeah. Similar to the pivot, like I appreciate elements of the pattern of this grip, but it's a bit thin for my preference. It's going to be perfectly adequate for a couple of weekends at the bike park if you're tight on funds and you need to put that money towards a lift ticket as opposed to grips.
Yeah,
I get it.
Suspension setup was easy. I didn't set up anything.
Yeah, I love the ease of suspension setup. It's kind of refreshing to know that you really don't need much. I don't mind having less like options for compression or rebound tuning. You still have low speed, high speed compression control on this thing. You're just controlling high speed compression with the tokens. And then it's the compression adjustments effectively controlling low speed. So
I know that I'm still having to every now and again refresh myself on what all of those different settings really are doing to your bike. And we're fiddling with knobs all the time. It's like it's at some point it's easier just to kind of have that stuff to where there isn't the option to like mess it up or to get confused by it.
Yeah, and I think riders that do get confused or maybe twist too many dials on their fork or shock and then go to their tuner buddy like, hey, I screwed this all up, like they're gonna appreciate this. It's just simple. It's simple. All I would do is buy a Sprindex spring for that shock and then just beat this thing up. I'm sure it'd be, you know, $100 to rebuild or whatever. There's nothing to it, and it worked great. I have no complaints.
I think I would totally agree, because the stock spring on this was a 450 pound, and the first day of riding, it was like just a hair like oversprung for me. Like riding bike park stuff, it was perfect. Like didn't really compress through like lips and held up in berms real nice. But if you had a Sprindex and you had that option between 400 and 450, you know, you could crank it all the way up if you're just gonna go ride like bike park jump trails all day, and then, you know, tone it back to desired weight for just kind of like your general downhill riding. I mean, personally, having ridden some high pivot bikes, I think I get along with it great. I think it's like the best performing for downhill riding, like suspension platform that's out there, at least one of the best. The new Session definitely takes advantage of all of the perks of having a high pivot, you know, having that rearward axle path, having a very like gaining momentum feeling as you hit compressions, which is a pretty wild sensation. There's no feeling of getting hung up. Like you're mentioning, there's no pedal kickback, so it's a very like smooth controlled ride. Like I would define or like describe this bike with one word, and it's like stability for me. It's like so stable in all situations.
Agree with you. It's really stable and it's really fast. It really does accelerate through chatter, which I had to compensate sometimes. On G19, it's so dry, and that moon dust over rock, it's slippery. It's almost like dry ice, similar to mud.
Where I was, I couldn't see the bike with like the bushes. I could just see like your body, and it looks like even in all the chunky stuff, like you stay pretty like just even the whole way.
The bike does a lot of the work, and you can feel like in these chunky sections, you feel that high single pivot doing what it's intended to do.
Dude, it feels like it like pushes. I remember like pushing me almost.
Yeah. One thing I'm actually doing today, because it's so dry and so unpredictable, I'm doing a little bit of trail braking. So I'm just dragging a little bit of back brake, and I'm having no issues holding my line in the sand. So I really like how the active braking pivot works. I mean, like the suspension's not working against me when I'm trail braking. It's fully active.
I think part of the reason such a base model rear shock felt like it performed well was part and just the suspension platform itself working so well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that low speed sensitivity, you know, you kind of mitigate some of that with just wheel path.
Yep.
Right, so there was no real stiction at all. Yeah, I think this is a great race-oriented suspension platform.
Totally.
For sure.
Can you tell the difference between that and a DW and a 4-bar? Like, is the braking significantly different?
I would say no. I would say it functions as it's stated it should. And I think with this bike being progressive, it's not harsh, you know, it's ramps up and is progressive, but that, you know, initial quarter to half part of like the stroke of the shock stays pretty supple. I think that probably is the ABP like doing its thing, kind of keeping that like active feeling, especially like, you know, when you are braking and stuff.
Yeah.
I never noticed like any loss of traction or anything like that.
Nope. Yeah, not at all.
She tracks.
Yeah, so we ran this in 25% progression the entire time. Didn't feel the need to change it. Maybe we should have started in 20 and try to bottom it out and see how that feels and compared it to 25, but 25 felt great the entire time.
Yeah.
I'll start with my least favorite aspect of this bike is the 180 millimeter rotor out back. Just not enough braking power, especially for full-size humans, and the larger wheels. Back in the 26-inch era, you could pull this off, but Trek, get a 200 mil rotor on here next time, please.
200 minimum.
200 minimum,
not 220.
Yeah.
That was one of my misses as well, especially when you put it with Code R brakes, which don't have a pad contact adjustment. So like right now, when you pull both the brakes, the rear throw is like almost to the grit because we've just cooked the rear pads, just overheating them, you know. And now there's no way to adjust it out without doing pads or doing a bleed. So, I mean, I know we both definitely didn't get along with the G5 Spec as a front tire. Rear tire performed totally fine.
I will say though that this tire in the front works the best in this super loose sand. It's actually working the best. Done the best, yeah. Like this big channel on kind of hard pack, I have zero confidence with it. So you're like, you've got some traction, and where does it go from there, you know?
insert slam. I was gonna say, what's that front tire look like? Just
Yeah, front tire looks like a cheese grater came through my forearm.
other small thing would be how the cables enter the head tube. Like if you're gonna go racing and you're gonna try to put on a number plate, like you're gonna have to cut a hole to fit your cables through there. You know, you can run these externally. When you run it externally, instead of it diving onto the non-drive side head tube, you're going, I believe, under like your top tube, and like maybe that's the way you got to do it, so you can like pull your cables up to like the bar. But other than that, I mean, the weight. I think the weight is probably one of the misses on this that can kind of go either way, because it's pretty personal. Like, what is a heavy bike for somebody? I think the reason for me it's a little bit of a negative or miss on this bike is that the past session for all those years was such a light downhill bike. I mean, their highest end model came at, you know, 33, almost 34 pounds. So like, that's pretty insane. I mean, this thing's just under 38 pounds. You could definitely get it down. For me, I don't know, I probably prefer a little bit less beefcake. Even though like how the cables dive out, it just looks like you would just be munching through your cables with like the rocker. There's no issues there. Like there's no rub, but the little clamp on the seat tube definitely like rattled loose a few times.
To me, this is like just a Velcro traction machine. It jumps. If you have some like really good pop in your legs, it might jump for you, but I felt like it was just kind of a dead lead sled, you know, just getting through the jumps and
for sure
try not to case.
Which, like, you know, maybe if you're at an ability level where you're trying to go out and like progress your jumping, for sure having a stable bike is going to be very beneficial to that. If you're a bike park ripper and you're trying to like jib off of every parking curb and stuff, like gonna take some serious effort to like get this thing moving the way you want it to.
Yeah.
But again, Kate Edwards continuously proves us wrong there. So,
Fit athlete.
you know, I'll let Kate sell this bike. It does backflips. So the most standout feature for me was definitely the Boxer Select fork and the Fox Van Performance Rear Shock. Just because for being kind of entry-level suspension, it performed much better than I initially thought. You know, a lack of external adjustments didn't hold it back for performing. It was a very like set it and forget it, but it still worked really well. Again, I think a little bit has to do with just the Session suspension platform being super capable, making up a little bit for the rear shock. But you know, the fork, I think we both would have benefited from a few more bottom out tokens, but
Definitely
like
needed more bottom out tokens.
Yeah, right. But a little bit of extra like pressure in the fork, and I got it to feel good.
Yeah, this bike's got a lot of pros, but I'll make it concise. So geometry, fantastic. Love this machine. Size S2 is perfect for 5'10" mixed wheel setup. The wheels actually are one of the highlight products. I mean, these are fantastic. They're true. I feel like we were really warmed up and riding, and my intensity felt like it was up there. And wheels held up great. And then the last bit is these Truvative cranks. They're really, really stiff. They complement the bike really well.
Yep.
So I'm developing. You guys see, I got a soft spot for budget wheels and cranks.
The free hub is what gets me, because like most cheaper wheels, you get like 3 points of engagement. I think these are 108. Like that's pretty freaking sweet for quote unquote budget complete build. So I was stoked on that.
Yeah, I love the engagement, and they had a good ring to them.
Yeah,
nice little
for
zip.
sure. I mean, it's cool that you can literally buy a bike. You could buy 2 wheel sets and not have to buy 2 forks and run any mixture you want.
It is rad how much changeability, there's so much things you can change on this bike. That's probably the strength of the Trek here, is you can do a lot of custom tuning with it.
Yeah, I would say so for sure. If I was gonna pick up my next race bike, I think this would probably be it. I think this is right up there as kind of competing with the Common Sol Supreme, which has kind of been the privateer's bike the last so many years. I think we're probably gonna see a lot more people riding these coming up. For maybe everyday riding, riding bike parks, jumps, flow, stuff like that, definitely wouldn't be my first choice. Still fun enough and capable, but it feels like you're lugging around a race bike a little bit heavier. Could probably make it a little bit lighter here and there, but yeah, I think for me, if I was gonna go racing, this would be my next bike.
My bottom line on this Trek session, for sure, expert level and up race bike. If you're like more beginner, intermediate, this is probably not the ideal choice. There's a learning curve that goes with these higher pivot bikes. They're unique in how they give you feedback. The chain length grows, the wheelbase grows as you corner. But for $5,000, I can see myself really considering owning, maybe not this particular model, but like I could see a 17-year-old me going, yeah, I'm gonna sell as many of my mom's BLTs as I can to buy this thing at school. You know what I mean? Like for $5,000, and you can easily upgrade a couple of things. You can get some hop-up parts for this fork and increase your high-speed compression. You can get a rad SKF seal kit and make it super buttery. You can get a Sprindex kit for your shock. So I think the bottom line is, if you've got $5,000 to spend and you're a fan of Trek bikes, yeah,
Do it.
do it.
Buy now. Not really apples to apples. I think just comparing bikes in general is not really apples to apples. I think what is a benefit of buying a Trek is that they have a pretty extensive dealer network. You know, you're buying a bike that if you need service and you need, you know, things specific to that frame, you should be in good hands getting that taken care of. For $5,000, I think you're getting a bike that's insanely capable, and you're gonna be changing out parts just kind of as you wear through them in a normal like period of time. So
Yeah, I think for $5,000, this is about as good of a deal you're going to get from a box brand. Yeah, and really the bargain is you can get a cheaper bike from a consumer direct company, but yeah, the cost benefit of a Trek dealer in your area, the relationship with that dealer, you never know what kind of sponsorships might develop from that. You never know where you're going to go.
would I buy like the higher end one? I don't know if I really would, because I think I could probably spend less than that $2,000 and put it into this bike and get it to ride like as good as I'd ever want it to.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy. You can buy 2 Miatas for the price of this bike. Think about that.
Thanks for watching, everybody. For more information on Trek's new session, you can visit vitalmtb.com, and stay tuned for more Summer of Downhill.